Welcome, everyone, to PostPhDirections, the podcast that helps early career researchers navigate the transition from academia to industry. Whether you're just wrapping up your PhD or exploring new horizons beyond the lab or lecture hall, we're here to share stories, strategies, and insider insights to guide your next steps. This podcast is brought to you by Alma Me, the professional platform that helps PhDs land non-academic. And today, we're joined by Ben Weber. He is the Vice President of Translational Research at Novo Nordisk, and he earned his PhD in pharmacometrics at University of Florida, and since has built an impressive career leading R&D and translational teams across the United States, Germany, and Denmark. And with his experience both as a scientist and a hiring manager, Ben brings a global perspective on what it takes for PhDs to thrive and stand out in today's evolving pharma landscape. And I am very, very happy and glad, and it's my real pleasure to welcome you, Ben, to the podcast.
Thank you, Elena. The pleasure is all mine. I was very happy when you invited me to be here today. And I've always followed your career with a lot of passion. So yeah, great pleasure to be here and very excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Ben, our history goes back a long time. I was actually thinking about it today. I think we've known each other for more than 10 years by now, and you've been very critical. I would say critical is a good word in my own career to decide to go for a PhD. I think you've always been a role model for me of where a PhD can take you. So, yeah, you've definitely made an impact in my career, in my life. And I hope with this episode, we can make an impact for everyone listening, because I think you have a wealth of experience in hiring and really across the globe, literally. And yeah, I would like to delve into this. But before we actually start, because I'm quite aware about your journey, but I would just like you to introduce yourself a little bit. How began your career in academia and has now led you to translational medicine at Novo Nordisk? What were some key steps that took you where you're at?
Yes, absolutely. I started doing a PhD at the University of Florida, and I don't think at this point in time I was thinking so much about academic career versus career in the industry. For me, the PhD was an opportunity to extend my education, plus also an opportunity to spend a significant portion of my life abroad. I knew through my network from some people who worked in the industry that most of the jobs in pharmaceutical industry in R&D often have a PhD as an entry-level requirement. So by doing a PhD, I had a chance to go abroad. I had opportunity for continuous education, but I also knew it was a door opener for other jobs. Then during my PhD, I was in a very lucky situation that most of the professors at the University of Florida College of Pharmacy had very strong ties to pharmaceutical industry around the world. And they encouraged the students during the summer semester to do internships with either pharmaceutical industry or the US Food and Drug Administration. And I did 2 internships with the US Food and Drug Administration, which gave a very practical angle to my PhD thesis and also enabled me to establish a network with scientists at the FDA and also with scientists at other companies who were interested in the work that it jointly did with the FDA. Then, I felt after my PhD and my FDA experience, I wanted to join the pharmaceutical industry. I think I was certainly in a very fortunate situation that at the time I graduated, the science of pharmacometrics, or PK/PD modeling and simulation, was a field where more jobs were available than qualified applicants, which enabled me to get a position straight out of my PhD. I then had a very successful and rewarding journey at Boehringer Ingelheim. I stayed there almost 10 years, had the opportunity to work in Germany and the US, had the opportunity to lead teams, groups in both the US and Germany. And then, I got a really nice opportunity to join Novo Nordisk as the Vice President of Translational Research, which I was intrigued to because it allowed me to ascend to a next leadership level in a more complex leadership role, but also broaden a little bit my portfolio into more experimental biomarker setup that I didn't work so much hands-on before. And yeah, I mean, coincidentally, I'll be soon venturing in my new journey. I can't share that yet, but there's something even more exciting coming up at Horizon soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben. You said at the time I was fortunate enough that there were more jobs than actually applicants. How do you think now in 2025 the landscape within pharma hiring has changed compared to when you were on the job market?
That's a great question. I think in general, I would say I think the macroeconomic environment for pharma R&D is currently a little bit more challenging versus the last maybe 5 to 10 years. A lot of the pharma companies are downsizing. There is not so much M&A activity. So in general, there are fewer jobs available in the industry. That said, I think there's always a time where certain expertise is more needed than another expertise. For example, when I graduated, there was definitely a shortage in people who could do hands-on PK/PD pharmacometrics analysis, which was a benefit for applicants. I think in the meantime, without knowing the details, I think academia is educating now way more qualified PK/PD scientists. So I don't think these days it is not so easy anymore to get a job in that field versus 10, 15 years ago. But there are always emerging fields where maybe academia is a step ahead. So, if, for example, in the AI ML world, which is a very hot topic these days, there is probably also a lack of qualified applicants. So I think it also always depends a little bit on to which the skill set one obtains during the PhD or postdoc is needed in the industry setup.
Okay, so let's assume we have now PhD students or postdocs listening in. They say, how can I build a skill set that is competitive in the current market? What are some things that you would say, take a closer look at this? This is a really highly sought after skill set within pharma at the moment.
That's a very good question. I think in general, anything related to data, science, AI, ML applications is probably a field, especially if that is grounded in some solid understanding of a pharma R&D value chain. There's probably also a trend I have observed over the last few years that I had a lot of good applicants coming from a postdoc or from PhD who had a lot of subject matter expertise. But when I interviewed them, they were always a little bit weak when it came to like understanding of the pharma R&D value chain. And you also spoke about a differentiator, and that could certainly be a differentiator. If someone on top of their scientific subject matter expertise they acquire during their PhD or their postdoc, also develop a solid understanding of how pharma R&D works.
Okay, so what are you suggesting? Does it make sense for me to sit and study what that means? Should I go for an internship? How can I get that skill without being in industry? Want to move into industry, but you need industry experience to move into industry. So it's a big, big question we all try to solve. So from what I understand, most employers look for applied skills. So does it really help me to sit and take a course? Or what would you think is a good way to get that insight?
It's another good question. It's probably a mixture of the things you mentioned, and it's also a little bit based on individual preferences, how one learns, how one acquires knowledge. I think, especially these days, with having large language models very easily accessible, I think self-studying some basic principles about how pharma R&D works would probably be an essential. And I'm pretty sure that it can be acquired via self-studying and getting a little bit of a feeling for how can the scientific subject matter expert that a PhD or postdoc has basically contribute to the bigger picture. Because that's why I often see a little bit of room for improvement, especially for junior applicants, getting a little bit better of a feeling for how does their niche knowledge fit into the bigger picture. What are the opportunities of that subject and what might be limitations that need to be overcome?
Okay,
I would say on top of that, to build on that, I think if you have the opportunity during your PhD or to postdoc to do an internship, that is definitely highly recommendable. because this gives you first-hand insights in the industry, and this helps you to build a network and really gives your maybe future employer an opportunity to see a person in action, but vice versa. The person in the internship also gets a feeling for how their employer is, because in the end, it's always kind of two parties needing to match.
I hope universities are listening in to create that space for PhDs to do these internships. I do know that universities start slowly recognizing that this is really important, but not everyone, of course, has the opportunity. In this case, I guess studying, getting familiar with the field. What does pharma R&D do, and how can I add value? So when you talk about the pharma R&D value chain, I guess a lot of people sit here and think, what is Ben talking about? Can you give us a little bit of insight? So I want to apply now in pharma and I want to implement what you said. What are like 3 things I can do today to learn a little bit about it? What are some keywords that I should be putting into ChatGPT to help me understand how I can learn about this?
Yes. So probably start by putting in what is the pharma R&D value chain, and you probably get a good answer.
Okay.
I think in the end, it's basically what is needed to get an idea through preclinical development, then through clinical development to patients in need. And maybe also get some understanding how are ideas for new drugs and targets generated these days. And then what is needed, like chemistry, biology, technological knowledge, formulation. It doesn't have to be deep knowledge, but some feeling what is like on a high level needed in all of these phases.
Okay. So now let's assume I'm a PhD and I'm applying. What do you think is a good way to communicate that I have acquired that knowledge in my resume? Because at the end of the day, I don't have any practical application. How would you communicate it to be not like to show that you have that knowledge? What do you think would be a good way to demonstrate this in a piece of paper?
On a piece of paper, yes. I think it depends a little bit on which stage you are in the interview process.
Mm.
I think initially, especially for junior level applications, there's usually a high number of applicants that a hiring manager don't necessarily always gets to see. And there's also a trend to automating an initial step. So one needs to basically strike the right balance, basically between matching a little bit what is in the job description to basically go through the first automated step. But then when you're through that, the hiring manager will very likely get the same application as you send in, because you usually only send in one application. And I think, and this is again highly individual, and I only speak for how I look at CVs and how I have done to apply for jobs. But often I think if you have like a concise, like 3 to 5 sentence summary at the top of your resume or CV, and if in that you could basically outline how the skill you have acquired during a PhD or postdoc could help in that role or could help in that position, that would be something I would say that probably distinguishes a normal applicant and an outstanding applicant.
So thank you, Ben. So you really answered my next question. And I think it also answers one question about the professional summary. Angela and I, my co-founder at Almami, we're very big on the professional summary. We think it's the hook of the resume, of the CV. So what we always say, bring some personality in, differentiate yourself, and connect your skill set to the role and how you can make a difference, actually. If we think a little bit beyond, what have you seen are common mistakes PhDs make when applying for industry roles that actually might hold them back? Because, a lot of PhDs, they send out CV over CVs. We work with PhDs, they have sent out 400 applications with 0 interviews. So now the problem is no one gives you actual feedback on what's wrong. So you don't really know where to start fixing things. What do you think are common things that you could share that a lot of PhDs do? And if they're stuck at that stage, this is something they could look at?
Yes, it's a great question, and probably a common mistake that not only PhDs make. I think that's probably common to different skill sets, and I certainly have been there too. I mean, you mentioned the number 400. if one indeed sends out 400 applications, my initial concern would be, or at least my question would be, were each of those 400 tailored to the job? And were you really qualified for those 400 positions? Because in the end, each job application, you need to put some effort, some time into it to tailor it, to make it specific. You need to invest some time. And if you invest into 400 applications, that requires a lot of effort. So I would say, I think also here already less is more. So instead of applying for 400, maybe pick your maybe top 10 or maybe only top 5 and then make really an effort for these, because each rejection or not hearing back comes with some cost. I think regardless of the level where you are, if you apply for a job, if I apply for a job, and I have applied for quite many jobs, there has been quite some disappointments. Not hearing hurts, does something with you. Hearing back with a rejection does something to you. So already start basically being selective in which company you approach, which job you really apply for.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is tailoring your CV/resume. Now we're using both languages in the American resume and the European CV. So tailoring your CV is something we also teach, and I think a lot of PhDs often lack a strategy on how to make the transition, and I think that's what makes it so difficult for some. I mean, you're out of a PhD, you have no idea which roles exist, you have no idea which roles align with your interests and your values and your skills. And what happens a lot is that a lot of PhDs go with the shotgun approach, which I totally do not recommend, because at the end of the day, what you do, if you try to please everyone, you please no one. So what we really also recommend is pick your 1-2 roles and target your resume towards these roles. And this also allows you actually to relatively quickly adapt. So when you move into a specific role, you want to mention relevant skills. It's great that you got all of these other skills, but if they don't really show me how you can do that particular job, they're irrelevant. So what a lot of PhDs do, they dilute their own skill set so that it becomes a guessing game on how you can actually do the role.
Yes, I can only agree to that. And I think on top of that, if I see resumes or CVs that contain a lot of information, that also at least raise the question in me, will these people be able to prioritize in the job? Because if it's difficult for a person to choose the top skills to include in a resume, it may very well be that the people have a difficult time narrowing down topics for a presentation and if they interact with others. So being able to prioritize is a key skill that actually one can a little bit infer from the quality of a CV and resume already.
And Ben, I think you just said something so important, because what you see on the other side, you read this person doesn't know how to prioritize, this person doesn't know how to communicate concisely. But the interesting thing is that most PhDs are not aware that one needs to tailor, that one needs to focus on relevant skills, because they have never been taught. But the sad truth is that this doesn't really matter, because it still doesn't give them a job just because they don't know. And I think that's in a way the challenge PhDs have, because I'm sure they can prioritize, I'm sure they can do these things, but they need to know that this is the way it's done. And that's why we exist, honestly, because a lot of qualified people fall through the crack because they don't operate on the right knowledge. They operate on things that they have heard from their professors. They operate on things they have heard from their peers. And it's all well-intended advice, but it's often not the right advice. And unfortunately, it disqualifies you quicker than you think. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I think there is, an element that I think any academic institution, I think they also have a duty to educate their students, their postdoc in these fields. And I think one of my most impactful experience as a PhD student was, at the end of it, there was a course offered from the University of Florida for all PhD students with the title like how to make your scientific knowledge shine through a presentation. And it really changed my mind. And I had given many presentations about my PhD topic, which was highly technical, as many PhD topics. I always had a feeling, it wasn't bad, but I felt that people Never really got the gist of it. And then after that course, when I then gave my next presentation, afterwards, like so many people came to me and said, "Oh, Ben, it was really good. I now finally think I get it." And yeah, I mean, it was really an eye opener, this course, and was very privileged that I got this opportunity.
I think it just demonstrates one thing. I mean, PhDs are, I always say we're expert learners, but you don't know what you don't know. And offering these things, this is my whole mission when I started this company. I want PhDs. In your case, it was this presentation course, but I want PhDs to get access to the information on how can I make the transition. Very practical tools. How do you write a CV that actually gets attention? How do you prepare for an interview? It's a complete black box. It's overwhelming. There are so many different positions out there. So how do you start? So teaching PhDs a strategy on how they can think of where they want to go next and how they can practically approach that step is something I don't understand that universities don't take, or most universities, I need to say, don't really see a need for this. I have talked to a lot of universities. It is changing. I have currently run a course at Karolinska Institute. It's a self-paced course, completely scalable, which I'm really proud of. And you cannot believe the feedback, Ben. It's like, it's insane when people say, this is really something for my future. I finally understood the importance of networking. You need to just give them the information and you need to make it accessible. And if you give us the chance, and there's often a lack of awareness, you can't change something you're not aware of that you need to change. And that's why I think it's so important to have these conversations to say, okay, what are mistakes? Because we're often unaware, and help PhDs to see how they can do things in a way that they actually cut through the noise.
Without a scientific knowledge, without a scientific foundation, you wouldn't even qualify for any of the jobs. But in anything that you mention, anything that you offer to universities are differentiators. Um, and those don't, they help you land a job, but those skills will also help you accelerate in your career journey. So you're not only learning something to get a better chance at a good job, but you also learn something, I think, that will benefit your entire career.
I don't know if you're hinting towards networking. Maybe this is something we can spend a minute on. I'm a big, how should I say it, voice to encourage PhDs to go out, network, and reframe what networking is, because it's really not going out asking for a job. It's about curiosity, building real relationships, right? When you think about academia, it's a very individual sport. You have your project, you push through on your own in a way. Of course, you do have collaborations, but at the end of the day, you're the one driving it. So when we think about the environment within pharma or in general industry, how can you think of yourself in an environment where you're just one puzzle piece of the bigger puzzle in terms of being able to communicate cross-functionally? So speak technical language to non-technical audiences. How important are these, let's say, softer skills when you make the move into industry?
Yes. Very important. I would say again back. I mean, you need to have the foundation. Without a scientific knowledge, you won't go anywhere. That's basically the entry ticket. And then communication skills, networking skills, maybe under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, those are the differentiators and the accelerators. There are many roles, and you can certainly also have a career as a deep scientific expert. But whatever you do, you will need to be able to explain your highly technical results, at least to your boss. And often the boss is less knowledgeable. And then to be really impactful, you always need to be able to explain it in simpler terms to people who have less knowledge about a topic that you have. And that is not easy. It is difficult, but it's also an acquirable skill that comes with training, and it is a differentiator.
So if we think about the skill of emotional intelligence, one of the things we really train PhDs on when they go into interviews is be conversational. Be conversational, have a conversation, think of your opposite as a colleague. We talk a lot about being personable and that this is something that really can get you hired. We're talking baseline, you check the boxes, you have the scientific skills because that's the basic entry ticket, but it's also not going to differentiate you because everyone who's sitting in that room in an interview has these basic skills. Check. So what is your opinion on how can someone differentiate in an interview to be memorable?
It's a very good question. I would probably start with, be authentic and know who you are, what your preferences are, and what are things you actually don't like. And then also be mindful about what does a certain job require. For example, if you are a person that actually is not so good at communicating with others and it may be exhausting, it doesn't give you so much energy, you probably shouldn't apply for a role that is a lot of customer facing. And maybe rather focus on a role that allows you to spend more time, like, for example, analyzing data or more of a desk job. It's still beneficial, of course, if you have some kind of communication, but I think these days with the emergence of all the social media, the workplace, you can also engage in chats. You can engage in discussions. So I think the opportunity for an introvert to network is better. So I would say, yeah, be authentic. Don't force yourself into being someone you don't want to be or you can't be just to get a job, because that will also not be sustainable.
I think you just mentioned something very, very important. I speak about certain topics on LinkedIn and I know they're just going to fly because everyone knows if I don't get interviews, the CV is my problem, right? Is a very easy thing. But what most PhDs just step right over is clarity about my interests, about my skills, and about my values. Because just as you said, maybe if it doesn't give me energy to engage with people on a daily basis, I shouldn't apply for an MSL role where I need to establish relationships. So know yourself and understand what are your strengths and where do you thrive. And also, it will help you to be able to tell a story in the interview. Why you want to do the job you do. Why do you love to create? Why do you love to work with data to give? What is it that really excites you about it? Because I think at the end of the day, when people can feel like that you're passionate about something, when they can feel that you love what you do, I think you increase your chances of getting hired, actually. Because at the end of the day, hiring is an extensive process. Hiring the wrong person can not only cost a lot of money, but potentially it can also destroy team dynamics. When you think about Angela and I talk a lot about the concept of fit in industry. There is a skill element, but then beyond the skill, there is you're part of a team. How do you integrate into the culture? How do you fit within the team? And so yeah, knowing good.
Yes, I
Yes,
agree.
you agree. Okay. Yeah. Can we talk two last questions? So what do you think about high impact publications? Sometimes they say high impact publications is a requirement for the job. We always recommend don't put the publications in the CV, put a link, with all your publications in. What is your take on the importance of publications if you move into a pharma R&D role? So now we're very specific pharma R&D.
Yes, I think it matters a lot. It's again how I look at things. If you spend a significant portion doing a PhD and doing a postdoc, I think having a few publications is usually an indicator that people are capable of finishing things and basically concluding a project. I think that's one element. Another element, I think the simple task of writing a paper with all the structure elements needed, aligning with all the co-authors, going through the peer review process where you get comments from different referees that you may not agree with necessarily. And then you have to find a diplomatic way of showcasing your point of view are the everyday skills you need to be successful in work. So I will say this is a differentiator if people come out of the PhD and have, let's say, a reasonable number of publications that don't always need to be in a high impact journal, because that also depends a little bit upon like what kind of research one does during their PhD. But if I see, for example, an applicant after 6 years PhD postdoc without a single publication, I would at least like to hear a very good story of that person. Why have they not succeeded in a publication?
Thank you, Ben. I mean, what is interesting is that you're actually emphasizing a lot of things that actually have nothing to do with the actual publication, but it's like being able to take something from A to B and finish, being able to handle feedback, being able to work across with different people and lead communication and make things work, because we all know, especially in academic collaboration, sometimes it goes across many time zones. So that was very, very insightful, because at the end of the day, it shows, I feel like, more about the traits of a person rather than, the actual scientific discovery, if I understood that correctly. So it's not so much about it's in a high impact journal and it was like super insightful and you identified this new gene that is now a therapeutic target. It shows something about the person, right?
Yes, and they are transferable skills. To maybe use that word. And I mean, yes, of course. I mean, if you have also scientifically interesting publication, I mean, yes, of course. I mean, that is also a differentiator and another door opener, but there was more to it. But I also wanted to emphasize there are some people who are very smart, who do great work during their PhDs, and for whatever reason, they don't get a publication. If you have the self-awareness to explain why it hasn't worked out and showcase that you maybe have some learnings, that can also be very powerful during an application. Going back to what you said earlier, being able to tell a story matters in an application process, in an interview, and matters throughout your career.
So now I just came up with another question, because I'm very curious on your take. A lot of PhDs come to us and say, oh, I applied for this job. And obviously you don't always have 100% match, and you shouldn't say. So there will be certain things that where you don't have direct hands-on experience. What do you think is an elegant way in an interview to answer, do you have experience with XYZ and you have no experience with this, instead of saying, no, I don't? Do you think there is a more elegant way of answering? I would love to hear, what do you think is a good way to talk about something that you actually don't know without selling against yourself?
It's an excellent question. It probably depends on what the specific gap is. I mean, let's go back to my home discipline of PKPD, modeling and simulation. And if, let's say, you're applying for a entry-level role in PKPD modeling simulation, and it turns out that you don't have any hands-on experience, and if that comes out through the interview, I don't think, I mean, there is no way you can duck yourself out of that hole, and then you shouldn't have applied for that job in the first place. But you're right. In any job, there are always so many requirements that no person in the world will ever fulfill. I mean, I personally saying upfront, maybe this is something I don't know. However, I have a similar experience. Let me share you with this. I mean, that would probably be my preferred approach, because being straightforward helps you. Because if you start to kind of wiggle around it, you have an experienced interviewer, they will actually get you to a point after 5 to 7 minutes that you say, oh, I don't know. And then you left a bad experience. So as I said, be upfront, be transparent about it, but then offer a similar experience and again show transferable knowledge.
Good. I like that answer, because what we usually say is, do say I don't have direct experience with, XYZ, but I do have experience with this, and that's why I'm quite confident that I can acquire this skill in no time. I know how to run RNA sequencing. I'm sure I can do single cell sequencing. I understand the basics, because I do have a basis. I have a basis of understanding. Coming back, yes, you do need to have that, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be competitive. But of course, there are always methods that you have never used, but you have maybe used a method that is similar, or because you understand the research approach, it will be relatively easy for you to pick up any new methods. This is what we do all the time, and positioning yourself as a learner and as someone who can acquire knowledge. I like the approach of offering a solution or a more reflected answer, instead of just saying, I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, last question, Ben. What advice would you give someone, or what is an advice that you wish you had known earlier during your career as a PhD that actually helped you accelerate?
Probably many things. I mean,
Okay.
you learn something probably every day in your career. And probably, I think, during my PhD at the beginning of my career, I was too focused on being right. And certainly learning as I have matured as a person, as a leader, it is not always about being right. And I think this is definitely something, I think, especially for scientists, it takes some time to get used to this. Um, there are always very different opinions, also on science. And yeah. That's the
Okay.
thing I wish I would have learned earlier and someone would have told me, Ben, it's not always about being right.
No, and I sometimes feel a lot of scientists have that struggle. So thank you for that. Well, Ben, thank you so, so much. It was really, really insightful. I think a lot of PhDs, postdocs, we these days also work with a lot of tenure professors. So whoever is listening, I think you made a real difference here with your insights. And I just want to say to everyone, thanks for tuning into the episode of Post-PhD Directions. And as always, we hope it gave you something to think about or even act on as you explore your life beyond academia. And do not forget to check out the episode description for any links or resources mentioned today. And if you found this helpful, share with a fellow researcher and consider subscribing so you never miss an update. Thank you so much.
Thank you.